Well, welcome to Pregnancy Help Podcast. My name is Christine Grimmett, and I'm here with a room full of people, friends. Some are board members or past board members of Heartbeat International, and we are here at Heartbeat International's annual conference. We're in Columbus, Ohio, celebrating our 50th anniversary. It's like a big birthday party for Heartbeat International. It's so exciting to be here, and we wanted to talk about Heartbeat's history. So we have Jor-El Godsey, president of Heartbeat International, with us, and we have Peggy Hartshorn, who is the former president and current board chair for Heartbeat International. And I'm excited to hear more about Heartbeat's history. So I will turn it over to them, and we'll get started.
Thank you, Christine. Yeah. Thank you, Christine. So it's a great opportunity, Peggy. We get to walk down some stories. Some of those things that I have heard. One of the things that I get caught quickly when talking to someone is in the U.S. at least, many of us today think of the abortion issue arising with Roe v. Wade in 73. But Heartbeat actually predates that, and the rise of the pregnancy help movement even predates Heartbeat a little bit. So could you kind of talk about that era? That's kind of like the late 60s, right?
Late 60s. I was in college. Wouldn't you know, I had chosen to go to California and right outside of San Francisco. From Ohio. I'm from Ohio. So that was already a brand new atmosphere. My grandparents had moved to California when I was a teenager. And but I was in a very traditional college, very traditional Catholic college. Everything seemed right with the world, you know, at that college. Everything that I believed and had been taught growing up, and I was learning more about God's plan for us and about the beauty of our creation. And, you know, it was an extension of who I had grown up to be, and I loved it. But around me, in San Francisco, there were the hippies, there was the whole sexual revolution was unfolding. I'd go into the city.
Unfolding, I would say it was really on fire in that area.
Well, that's true. Yeah, it had unfolded, let's say. Mm-hmm. And I thought you were going to mention something about the people burning bras in Golden Gate Park. They were undressing. It was not only unfolding, it was just very strange to me. And another direction from my college, they were burning buildings at Berkeley in the Vietnam War demonstrations. And so I felt it was kind of a culture shock, you know, and I would be at those places and then come back to the college where everything was as it should be. It was like I felt when I was there, the world was right-sided. When I left, what was happening? And sometimes I say this in our book that I felt like I was a frog that had been dropped into boiling water and I could jump out, versus the frog that, and I think this is unfortunately the case today with so many young people, teenagers my age growing up today. The water keeps heating up, that cauldron of untruth and all the temptations of the world and the pornography now and the confusion of ideas, the thought that there is no such thing as truth, everything they're being exposed to, you know, it's all around them, and they're just the water's being heated up and if they don't get out of that water, you know, they're going to boil to death. So I was very fortunate that I came from a place that when I was exposed to all of the things that were not true, I could see that, you know, and it was very disconcerting. One of the things that I saw was in 1967, billboards started to go up, pregnant, worried, call here, and they were abortion clinics. California, already before Roe v. Wade in 73, abortion, there were proponents, National Abortion Rights Action League, Planned Parenthood, a religious coalition for abortion rights were the three main groups that were promoting liberalizing our abortion laws all over the country. And they were having success in some states. I think there were 5 or 6 states that had liberalized their laws, including California, before the Supreme Court decision. And I guess in my perspective, I knew that was happening in California, and it was shocking, but it was like, okay, this is California, and it's a crazy place, and I had no thought that this would happen everywhere.
So some things don't change, right?
Some things don't change, that's right. We have some wonderful people here from California and some of our former board members, and we know that God is working in California too, you know, and where there is evil, you know, God is trying to bring good through many, many people. And we have actually a large number of pregnancy centers now in California.
We do.
So, but at that time, I think all pro-life people thought we can turn this around. And in fact, there were referendums in some states where we had won. People had voted down changes in their abortion laws. And like Michigan is an example. And so we thought we could turn it around before Roe. Yeah.
Right.
So, of course, I knew nothing about pregnancy help at that point. But anyway, what happened was I went back to Ohio and things seemed right again. My husband and I got married. I went to graduate school. And it wasn't that I forgot about the issue, but it wasn't forefront in my mind. And when I was in graduate school, driving up to meet my advisor, I was in a graduate program, a graduate school, I heard announced on the radio that the Supreme Court today, January 22nd, 1973, has handed down a ruling declaring the right to privacy and right to the woman for privacy, and that will negate all abortion restrictions in state law in this country, and all through the 9 months of pregnancy. And I just couldn't believe it was true. And I suppose along with that, all the things that were happening in our country at that point, the Vietnam War, the demonstrations against the Vietnam War, the assassination of Bobby Kennedy, the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., all these things were happening. And so the world was just, what is happening here? And I thought, at least with this abortion issue, maybe I can do something. And that's what I felt. Something's wrong in our country. How can this be happening? Everybody has to know and understand what I know and understand. That was kind of the thought. And that was the thought of the early pro-life movement. Really, we can turn this around because people just don't know that human life begins at conception. They just haven't seen the pictures, They don't know. And so Mike and I started out in the Right to Life part of the movement. And that was the thought. Let's take them the pictures. Let's show them that human life begins at conception. And surely the American people will respond. But that didn't happen.
Of course not. We're, of course, 48 years later after that moment. But also in that time frame, there was something else going on, because you describe, as you've explained to me, there's a meeting in Washington that then translates to a meeting in Chicago. Again, this is a little...
Unlike me, who was kind of oblivious to thinking that I was being told we can turn this around. Well, there were visionaries at that point, people of the next generation above me, who knew and understood that this was much deeper, and that once abortion became legal, there would be people pressuring women, and particularly the men in their lives, which was true, coercing them toward abortion, even though instinctively, women would not want that. And they knew we had to have a safety net. They knew that this was not going to be something that was going to be turned around quickly. And that was our founders. The people and the Holy Spirit was really raising up people around the country, and then we later found out around the world, who knew that women and families needed a safety net, and they needed help and support, and that without that, there would be more and more and more abortions. So now they didn't know about each other. We didn't have the internet.
And who were these people?
They were ordinary folks. There were mothers, there were housewives. And among our founders, there were doctors. There were Catholic doctors, like our founder, Dr. John Hillebrand, because the Catholics, they had a tradition and a teaching about human life and the dignity of the person from the very beginning. And so they were ready to respond to this. Other Christians weren't quite as ready, to respond.
So this was largely a kind of a Catholic...
It was a Catholic movement, primarily in the 70s. So there were doctors, Catholic doctors, particularly OBGYNs, and one of them, Dr. John Hillebrand, was one of our founders. There were other people raised up. Sister Paula Vandegeer, one of our founders, she was a very young Catholic nun who was a sister of the social service. So she was a social worker. And she was assigned to an adoption agency there in California as her first assignment. And she all of a sudden realized that these girls that were coming to the adoption agency were barely there because they had been already being pushed into abortions. And she said, how could this be happening? So she was also called. But there were people of all walks of life, and they didn't know that each other existed at that point.
But again, they were largely in the Catholic community.
Yes.
And so, and I've heard this. Can you just speak to this? That in some ways, the other side used that.
Yes, they used it against us. When I would go out speaking, remember I started in Right to Life showing the pictures, just trying to educate people. Human life begins at conception. And we had the scientific facts, no question about it. We had rudimentary audiovisuals at that point. But the first question from the audience would always be, are you a Catholic? And when I would say yes, that's what we call, I am an old English teacher, by profession, an English teacher, the ad hominem argument. Destroy the man. If you destroy the man, you destroy the argument. And so
that's more
by
personal,
calling my Catholicism out, that was in their way of saying, well, that's just a bunch of old men in Rome that, are making crazy rules that don't apply to women today. And so therefore, everything that you've said up to this point doesn't count. And that was truly, it was used against us, unfortunately.
So in some ways, it was used to divide.
Yes,
because the Protestants of that time, or evangelicals, didn't necessarily want to be confused with Catholics, because obviously there's a little division that's been around for a few hundred years. But that was almost like, hey, that was almost a warning to the other side that if you align with, then we're going to think you're Catholics, and somehow that's terrible. Mm-hmm. But of course it was used that way in essence to kind of scare them from the conversation. That's
true. And yet there were some very heroic Protestant pastors in those days. There was a Methodist pastor who was part of Ohio Right to Life's board. He was very outspoken. In a few years after that, they defrocked him. The Methodist Church defrocked him. Mm-hmm. And so what happened, unfortunately, was this group called RCAR, Religious Coalition for Abortion Rights, which still exists, although they've slightly changed their name. As the states started liberalizing their laws, they got busy getting many, many Protestant denominations. They had over 250 statements from different Protestant denominations in a brochure that stated things like, in many cases, abortion is the most merciful solution, for women with difficult pregnancies, or in the case of rape, or in the case of incest. And they had all kinds of official statements. They had gathered them together. And so I know that the Protestant churches were somewhat confused by that. So the Southern Baptist Church and the Missouri Synod of the Lutheran Church were the only ones at that point that had made pro-life statements.
Excellent. But I have seen the 1971 article, I believe, in Christianity Today, where it equivocates. I mean, it doesn't come down. You can see kind of the mushiness of the feeling that was coming, because Christianity Today was founded by Billy Graham, and so it was really interesting to kind of see the evidence of that kind of lack of anchoring in really the pro-life ethic that would come later. Yes. We're going to talk about that in a minute, but it was not
Praise
there.
God.
And I appreciate how you said it, that the Catholics were ready for this fight because of their teaching and the scholarship that came in. So then we get to Roe v. Wade, and then what happens?
Well, at that point, again, I didn't realize that there was already a safety net developing. And our founders and the people that the Lord was raising up around the country did eventually meet each other. They were called together. Again, the Catholic Church, there was a bishop who had been traveling around the country and saw that this was happening. So he got together 60 people that he knew in different states and parts of the country that were doing pregnancy help. They had started hotlines. They were doing it out of doctors' offices. They were meeting people on park benches. He got them all together in Washington and said, you people need to get to know each other. And that was basically it. And then they took it from there. And there was a group already started in Canada called Birthright, founded in Toronto. But the Americans decided, we don't all want to be the same name. We don't all want to have the same charter. And we've already established a few little centers and hotlines. So we want to have a federation of existing pregnancy help services. And we want that federation, which they ended up calling Alternatives to Abortion International, which is now called Heartbeat International. They said, we want that federation to that central body. We want them to help get us together and keep us together and help us train and help us be more effective, and even get an 800, a Watts line, where we could have toll-free women to be able to connect to us.
So thank you for referencing the Watts line, because
Again,
we didn't have
yeah.
Facebook back then. You know,
That was Watts line, yeah.
This was no small task back in
No,
those days,
right.
because you just couldn't be in an online group like we can now and suddenly
Exactly.
be connected.
Yeah.
It was actually quite the challenge to stay connected
Yes.
as a very diverse and geographically and in many ways denominationally in some cases.
And so I love that Heartbeat International was founded by our affiliates. They wanted us, they brought us into existence to make sure that the best training was available, that the best networking, that we could have a directory. That was another vision of theirs, that we would keep track of all the centers developing all over the world, so that we would not only be able to refer people to them, but connect with each other and collaborate. And so their vision was wonderful. And that happened in 1971. That was when Heartbeat was officially established. And so we're dating our birthday.
So that happened in Chicago.
Chicago,
The
yes.
official meeting where that really was cemented was late in the year, as I understand,
Yes,
like
it
in
was November
Okay.
of 1970. So we're but this is appropriate for our birthday. We're celebrating now, what's the month? April, right? Yeah. Because, I think it's in Japan, but it's in some Asian countries that they celebrate your birthday 9 months before you were actually born. So I think it's very appropriate that we're kind of celebrating our conception early, the early months of our gestation before November. How's that?
We'll go with that.
Okay.
Okay, so then we get into the 70s,
Yeah.
and this starts out as alternatives to abortion,
Yes.
Incorporated in essence,
Yes.
but then it quickly changes from being American or U.S. focused.
Yes, and one of our founders was a German lady, her name was Laura Meyer. She was a refugee from Nazi Germany. She spoke several languages. She had become a citizen of the United States, married an American, and settled in Toledo, Ohio, where one of our other founders, Dr. John Hillebrand, was. But she always had an international vision. And Dr. Hillebrand himself was a pioneer in true women-centered OBGYN. And so one of the things that was happening in those days was that the birth control pill had recently been invented. It was a very high-dose estrogen pill. And women were dying all over the world of blood clots caused by this high level of estrogen. And so he became an expert witness, and he traveled all over the world testifying in the deaths of women, who had died from the birth control pill. And so he had contacts all over the world as well. So both of them had a very international vision.
But that also reveals one of the challenges that we run into, particularly from the other side, is that we're baby focused. But what you just said is really coming from the heart of someone who was very woman-focused.
Women-centered, absolutely. And yes, you and I, Jor-El, in writing the book, The Power of Pregnancy Help, which Heartbeat is publishing for our 50th, I think we have a heading, it's more than saving babies. Yes, we are saving babies in pregnancy help, but from our founding, Heartbeat has always been very woman-centered as well, very family-centered. And Dr. Hillebrand was famous for saying, the first time I heard him say it, and then I've heard him say it, I did hear him say it other times, I've delivered 10,000 babies and never lost and I thought he was going to say baby, but he said mother. And I was just coming out of the Right to Life part of the movement. That really had a profound impact on me. And it's interesting, we have a doctor visiting us at our conference this year who heard me say that. And she came up to me and said, when you paused, she said, I was filling it in for myself. She said, I've had several thousand patients. And she said, when you got to that pause, I said to myself, I've never lost a patient. So she said, when you said, never lost a mother, she said, this is the kind of mission that I want here. I'm pro-life, and I'm a physician, but I want a mission that encompasses the whole woman, the whole family, So
Which
it's
is
powerful.
the pregnancy help movement.
That's
right?
us, yes.
Despite the allegations of the other side.
Absolutely.
So we get to the 70s. Now you have this kind of founding and framing that's going on of what it becomes later, Heartbeat International, but Alternatives to Abortion International.
Yes.
You have, I think you mentioned at one point that the original directory was primarily U.S., but also had a couple of international.
One entry from New Zealand, and it had, I think, 11 from Canada. Because remember, birthrights had been founded in Canada. There were 11 birthrights at that point, I believe, and one from New Zealand, and there were 103 entries altogether. This is what our founders knew of what was existing in pregnancy help. And about half the entries are just names of individuals that are starting centers, But one of the things I shared earlier was that in those days, not like Heartbeat today, there were not a lot of resources published for people who God was calling to start centers. And my husband and I, when we first heard about Alternatives to Abortion International, was 1978. And we went to our first conference in 1980 and attended a workshop, a 45-minute workshop on how to start a pregnancy center. We felt we were called to do that because we had been housing pregnant girls since 1975, and we knew we needed a pregnancy center in Columbus.
So the Hartshorn home was really the first pregnancy help center in Columbus, Ohio.
Kind of, yeah. Kind of.
And then it later became official with an organization and a building.
Well, we did have a birthright there. And let me clarify the difference in birthright and Heartbeat affiliates for the most part. Birthrights are wonderful organizations. They still maintain an all-volunteer character and a charter, and they all use the same name. They are really focused on pregnancy support. So when a woman decides to continue a pregnancy and needs support and help, they can provide her with. One of their main services used to be Lamaze classes. Remember when Lamaze classes were big? Maternity clothes and so forth. But they're not focused on real intervention in the crisis of, am I pregnant? Can I be pregnant right now? And which is what our pregnancy help centers mainly focus on.
Intervention.
Crisis intervention.
We would call it intervention. So
there was no agency there in Columbus, no group that was ready to, with a 24-hour hotline, with help and support. When you need it, we are here. Okay. Our doors are always open, and we didn't have that.
So then something big happens in as we move through the 70s. Something really, really important happens in 1979, to be specific, that changes the equation for the 80s. And we have the evangelical. There's a light that starts with a book written by Francis Schaeffer, who an evangelical theologian, one of the main thinkers of the evangelical. There are a few.
And whatever happened to the human race?
Yes, and he co-authored that with C. Everett Koop, who gets introduced to the whole nation just a few short years later as Surgeon General under Ronald Reagan.
Yeah.
So that launches a powerful change of the landscape of pregnancy help.
Absolutely. Some people say the Catholics were in the first wave, and then the second wave came along. Wow. And that was the evangelical churches. C. Everett Koop and Francis Schaeffer, they did a movie series, Whatever Happened to the Human Race, and that really brought in the evangelical churches and evangelical pastors. It's interesting because as you look back, anyone who is called by God, and I bet a lot of our listeners are, and maybe it may not be directly in pregnancy help, but God's called you. And you get involved in something, and then as you look back, you say, wow, he was preparing me for that all along the way. Well, I didn't know what was going to happen with the evangelicals coming into the movement, but I was still teaching at Franklin University at that point. I was still a college professor of English. And I was doing everything else was volunteer and pro-life. And we had a wonderful faculty group of Catholic professors there and Protestant and evangelicals. And we knew we were all believers, and so we said, let's get together and it was a secular university, but we said, let's have a book group. And one month a Catholic will choose the book, and the next month and a Protestant will choose the book. So one of the people in the group chose the book by Francis Schaeffer, and wow, that was such a great. It was wonderful for me to read that. So that had to be probably 1979. I didn't know what was going to come from that.
Sure.
But then I knew about it. I knew I was ready for it when it came. So, and for my particular preparedness for this wonderful movement now where we are all Christ-centered, all different expressions of Christianity here in this movement. I think that partly prepared me for that experience at Franklin, but also in my own family. My mother came from a Protestant family, and we had missionaries and church organists and choir leaders. And whenever I visited my grandparents, they dropped me off at Catholic Mass, and then I went to their church. And I loved the Sunday school. I loved everything about it. And then on my dad's side of the family, we had nuns and priests and daily communicants. And so again, I looked back and I said, wow, God, you really prepared me. I love this, I just love it. So God prepares all of us, for the role that he has for us.
So the evangelicals really start to get on board with what's going on, and because they're challenged deeply, because whatever happened to the race is really a call to do something.
Yes.
And one of the things that the pregnancy help movement represented to the evangelicals in particular was it really was this mixture of an opportunity to rescue someone who's in a challenging situation, but do it in the framework of an evangelical, which is basically to share the gospel or evangelize, right? So rather than go to necessarily Washington or the State House or head out to the lecture hall, they really moved in big in the pregnancy help movement, and that really happened. We have a chart at Heartbeat, and of the year founded of many organizations, and you can see very clearly 84, 85, 86 is like this big giant peak. You can almost see how the book in 1979 creates this really ginormous like influx of pregnancy help, and we think that's mostly evangelicals moving into this movement.
Well, and our center, the center we founded in Columbus, Ohio, was started in 81. So there were also a lot of Catholic groups starting centers at that time too that were finally getting the vision. So it was a real period of growth and development. And I remember Sister Paula, one of our founders, Sister Paula Vandegeer, who often said that in the 80s, our executive director at Heartbeat Central at that point, who was Lori Meyer, she could hardly keeping track of all the new pregnancy centers that we're developing. Yeah, and remember in those days, they were putting them on index cards and changing the direct addresses and phone numbers as they moved to other places and publishing our directory.
That's when they used things like whiteout. And,
yes, oh gosh, that was horrible. But yeah, there was a gigantic influx in the 80s.
Right.
And it was wonderful to see also. That's when we all started also realizing the Catholics and evangelicals, we didn't have to have Catholic centers and evangelical centers. We could work together. And that happened in the center that my husband and I founded in Columbus. And we had our grand opening on January 22nd, 1981. And already there were people trying to start or had the vision of starting a center from the evangelical community. But they had kind of been directed in some written material, if there is a center already existing, go and visit. So we had people coming from evangelical churches seeing what we did, and they said, hey, we love it. Can we join you? And we said, wonderful, yay.
Awesome. So that, by the way, that little story informs us at Heartbeat today, because when someone reaches out to Heartbeat and says, I think we'd like to start a center, one of the first questions that we will ask back is do you know where there's a center near you? Because what we will then tell them is, you never know, you may be the answer to prayer that community is already looking for more energy and more involvement, more engagement, so that it's not necessarily have to be two separate things. It could be working together, just as you described happened in Columbus.
And it was so wonderful. It's like being in Heartbeat today, where, you're sitting at a table with, or there's praise and worship, or, there's a Catholic speaker, or someone says we're still celebrating Easter, so let's say amen, hallelujah. And then you say, what does that mean? Let me find out, And so we're learning much more about each other and benefiting from that tremendously.
A big thing happens in the 80s that the evangelicals get involved in a big way.
Absolutely.
And then we move into the 90s, where we have another kind of major occurrence that happens. It started really in the 80s in a little bit, but it really begins to take hold in the 90s, and that's medical. Like that's when ultrasound becomes begins
Absolutely.
to become a powerful force in the pregnancy help community.
And there were some pioneers out in California. Actually, I was at an AAI board meeting when the Los Angeles people came to us, and our Los Angeles affiliates, and told us about a court ruling in Los Angeles County that doing a pregnancy test was considered a medical service, and you couldn't do that unless you were a medical clinic. That was limited at that point to Los Angeles County. But all of a sudden, we realized, well, we knew we were under attack, but now, could we not even do pregnancy tests? And so a few pioneering centers out in California had started trying to get medical directors, become licensed clinics, but it was really in the 90s that blossomed.
Yep.
And sometimes we call it going medical, with the addition of the ultrasound machine. And Jor-El, you've done some research on, I want you to share that, but the ultrasounds, bringing them into pregnancy centers, having nurses trained to do the ultrasound, all of a sudden we were able to get through the wall. Sometimes girls would come in who were abortion-minded and undecided, but they had a wall protecting them. They didn't really want to get into their real feelings and wants because they were bound and determined, I've got to have this abortion. I can remember one woman saying to me one time, I've got to have an abortion. Don't confuse me with the facts. You know, and so they had the barriers up. And once they could see their baby on the ultrasound screen, woo, that just took the barriers down. And there was their maternal instinct. And so it really, really helped us to get down to the core with the pregnant women. But yeah, but I want you to tell the story of ultrasound, how God used the ultrasound.
So that was an interesting story. I just started poking around and realized that, you know, we're looking at it as this amazing tool that becomes available in the 90s. But only to find out that it was really only invented in 1958 is when the first occurrence happens. And there was a Scotsman, Dr. Ian MacDonald, who was pioneering this. He had been in the military and he had worked with some of the radar and sonar equipment, and he had borrowed some information from some other people, and he was definitively pro-life. And actually, he was also in the midst of this, not unlike you, through the 60s. He's in the late 50s and 60s. The same dynamics are kind of happening in his arena in the United Kingdom. And he begins to stand up and then begins to advocate, because he is the first. He was an OB, and he's the first one to use this tool on masses inside the abdomen. And this becomes then the next thing that they start to scan for are babies and what that means. And so here's this pro-life doc creates this powerful tool, which years later becomes the powerful tool to transition the whole pro-life movement.
Isn't that
very
wonderful?
powerful.
Yay.
Now, here's a sad story is. One of his great hopes was to have been knighted for his work, being a member of the royal or a
United Kingdom.
royal subject, however they say it. I'm an American, so I don't fully know all that. But that was one of his aspirations, and it was denied him simply because he spoke out with great pro-life conviction. And anyway, great legacy. And someday, you know, we'll all be able to celebrate that what he did for us became a powerful tool for the entire pro-life movement just a couple of decades later.
Absolutely.
So it becomes more accessible to the local. We were able to, the idea that this just didn't have to happen in a hospital. It could happen in our offices, and all of that began to happen through the 90s.
Yes.
So then we move into the 2000s, and we're off and running because now growth is happening, and Heartbeat is well, you become president in the 90s. That's the other thing.
Yeah, I become president in 1993. I resigned from my full-time teaching job with much. People will say, well, kicking and screaming. I finally said yes to the Lord. I thought He was calling me, but I needed a lot of convincing. But finally said yes. And the minute I made that, actually had to turn my resignation in at the college. The minute I did it, I felt this gigantic burden lifted, and I knew it was the right decision. But it's been a wonderful, wonderful experience in my 23 years, starting there in 1993. Started small.
And you were the first paid employee.
I was the first paid employee of Heartbeat
And you were the
International.
first president.
And the first president.
So,
and I decided I should call myself president versus executive director because I had never been an executive or a director. I thought it sounded a little more kind of nonprofit-y, maybe like a nonprofit. position. But I thought also I'm the only employee, and our office right at this point is in a storage closet at a pregnancy center that lent us office space. So something better sound important, I guess, But really, it was, that expression, God does not despise small beginnings. And I bet a lot of our pregnancy centers have had those kinds of small beginnings. In fact, I know I've heard their stories. What happened was, after 20 years of all volunteer leadership at the top of our network, Alternatives to Abortion International, the visionaries, the people that had all the energy and the stamina, they were getting old. They were the older generation when they started AAI. And so they had to retire. Sometimes there was sickness in their families. There were just all kinds of issues and problems, and they didn't really have a good leadership transition plan. So I had been on the board.
They didn't have one, but apparently God did.
Well, thank you. But I was on the board and agreed to be the acting board chair and try to build up the organization again, and then eventually realized I was supposed to be the president, and then God just really blessed it. It was an amazing experience there in the 90s to see all the resources that he would bring. When you say yes, if this is really what he intends and this is his will, he will supply the resources. And he did. So it was a big building. It was, again, kind of a rebuilding phase for AAI. And so throughout the 90s, we moved from that storage closet.
Renamed it to Heartbeat.
We renamed it to Heartbeat International. Heartbeat was always a name associated with us. Our newsletter and then our magazine, which was a wonderful magazine we published for centers with all kinds of great research and articles on counseling and so forth, was called Heartbeat. And the first center that was founded by Dr. Hillebrand in Toledo, Ohio, the founder of AAI, was called Heartbeat of Toledo. So it was a name that people knew, and after that was another Holy Spirit thing, because our board had a whole list of 20 names that people thought would be great. And I should say why we changed from Alternatives to Abortion International, because that is the generic term. That was in the phone book as the heading, Alternatives to Abortion and Abortion Services. So I'm saying, why do we need to change this name? But very wise people said the word abortion is so polarizing that, and I got that experience when I tried to register us to do a conference in a hotel before we had changed our name. I said, we want to do the conference there. We'd like to, send us a potential contract. I said, our name is Alternatives to Abortion International. He said, oh, well, should we be expecting demonstrations? Will there be any violence? And this was back, in the early 90s. So I realized it was correct. We had to change our name. And that has been a blessing too. So now we're Heartbeat International.
Right, and have been ever since.
And have been ever since, yes.
So we moved from the 90s into the 2000s, or into the new millennia, right? We all survived Y2K. And we managed to get over that, and then we were off and running in the new millennia, and just to kind of meld the two 2000 and 2020 together.
Okay.
We really see some things begin to rise. Heartbeat begins to do some different things as well. We end up with being attacked. I know in New York.
A lot of attacks. The attacks really started in the 80s.
Also Ohio did it. Okay.
Yeah. In the 80s, it was more of a PR attack. They came in as fake clients and took. I don't know how they took videos of us because we didn't have cameras. I mean, we didn't have cell phones with cameras, but they had hidden cameras, and hidden microphones and tried to get us saying something wrong, that they could make us look silly in the media. Yeah, and there was a congressional hearings in the 80s, and it wasn't, obviously it was building up. Got much, much worse in the 90s and the 2000s, as you say.
Because we had a particular attack from, I know, New York, the state of New York.
Yes, the state of New York.
And also
Ohio.
Oregon
I think,
as well, is it?
Baltimore.
Late, that's true.
Those are a little bit later.
Yeah, and several years later, we get it becomes also a city strategy. It becomes not just a state strategy, city and county strategy.
And they tried all different things. They tried, saying, I can remember the one in Ohio where they wanted disclaimers in our Yellow Pages ad. All right, we were listed under abortion alternatives, and there was a listing for abortion services, but they wanted all of us in abortion alternatives to have all kinds of disclaimers. We do not refer for abortions. We do not refer for contraceptives. Everything we do not do, not everything that we do. But luckily, the centers fought back. Actually, we had a very pro-abortion attorney general in the state of Ohio in those days. So that's what was happening there, almost like the Holy Spirit raising up all these wonderful people that he was calling to start centers. The devil was somehow motivating a lot of other people, almost independently, in states and cities and counties to try all different ways of attacking pregnancy centers. Yeah, they tried all kinds of things.
And we're still here.
And we're still here,
and
yes,
and
stronger than ever.
That's right.
And I think
because
Jor-El,
why? Because why? We're doing what we know to do, which is love people into making life-affirming decisions.
And because God is with us. God is with us. And I think you wrote a really great article about the response to Nifla versus Becerra. So you may want to talk about that recently, of how what they intended for evil has absolutely been a blessing. Having that confirmed.
That's a longer story, but essentially the state of California tried to force the pregnancy centers in that state to carry a message to the clients of pregnancy centers that abortions were available, please contact. And so they were forced
in the state of California.
They were in essence forcing the pregnancy centers to promote abortion, the very thing that we stand against and stand to help people to avoid. And so what they tried to do in order to make centers do that ended up being a case which lost in California, lost in that district, lost at the appellate court. We lost. We lost everywhere along the way. And then until we get to the Supreme Court and we win 5-4. And so, and not only that, but what happened was several other states had picked up on that same kind of attack and began to do the same thing. I remember it was the state of Hawaii had also done this. And they were just distraught that they had to actually pay something to the local pregnancy center for all of the grief and attorney's fees that they had caused. But the center didn't ask for that fight, but the state had done it themselves. So the same thing in the city of Baltimore. We had happen a local ordinance, 6 years, and in fact the judge said that 6 years, 1,274 pages of testimony, and the city had failed to prove that there was anything wrong with what going on in that center, and wasted that. And I remember that a Baltimore council member as well, also bemoaning the fact that they had to pay out money for the very fight that they brought to the center.
Right.
And so it's unfortunate that they simply can't realize and respect the fact that these are good people doing good work in pregnancy help centers.
And the sad thing is, even though that was a great victory at the Supreme Court for our freedom of speech, that's still not stopping all the attacks. No. Now they're trying a different angle. So we know that God is protecting us. We constantly have to pray for that protection. But thank goodness he's raising up people, legal strategists, judges, attorneys, that are able to defend and protect us as well. And
we want to do that. But I think it's a good time to open up for questions and answers. Well, we'll have questions. Whether or not we have answers is a whole other question. Kind of depends on the question.
That was a great history, and thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
So the question is, what do you see the future of Heartbeat? What is Heartbeat going to become, and what do you need in order to accomplish that?
Great question.
Yeah, well, Jor-El and I just wrote this book of The Power of Pregnancy Help, and the last chapter is about the future. And I said, Jor-El, you write that. Jor-El is our leader, and he's got a vision. So I'd like for you to answer that, Jor-El.
Sure. It might be a little preview of my brief talk tonight, but really, to me, it boils into three major things. And I started thinking, because I have just been kind of captivated by what the founders of Heartbeat did 50 years ago, and kind of what they saw. And I was saying, Lord, how can I see something that I have no idea really what that's going to look like in 50 years? Because we are dealing with a speed of change in technology and even culture and a lot of things that it's like, wow, hard to even kind of forecast what will be available to us to accomplish the mission. But the mission is simple. And to me, it boils down to three main goals. We need more places. We need more pregnancy help locations, more maternity homes, more adoption. We need more places, and we need more people. We're going to need at least, we only have, I think we count, stretching the number a little bit, I think worldwide, we count about 100,000 people that do this work, focused energies on this work on a regular basis, 100,000. And so in my mind, we need to increase that 100-fold. We need to have 1 million people doing this, and to me, we're going to start running after that day one of the next 50 years, right? We're going to start running after that, and then the third thing is that we really need more pathways. We need more ways to do what we do. You know, the pandemic has kind of brought us along on some technology things. We so value relationships. And want to have those personal kind of knee-to-knee, nose-to-nose experiences because there's just something precious and valuable in that. But we're also realizing that we can reach people across great spans of distance, and that's why Option Line now is international. That's why Abortion Pill Rescue Network has gone international. I think the last count I saw was we've been contacted by people from 49 different countries looking for abortion pill rescue and reversal, and we've been trying to help make that happen. So we've got to have more people, and we have to have more places, and we have to have more pathways to bring and to champion pregnancy help all over.
That's right.
Thanks, Ken. Thanks for that question.
Multiplication.
He gave you a preview of tonight's chat, so that's great. Next question. Who's got one?
First of all, I want to thank each and every one of you guys for just such a great presentation. Peggy, I just appreciate everything you guys have just spoken and said so far. And as a former board member, how can we reach out into the Black community to get more people aboard? Because this is so vital. And I have such a heart for this, and this is so vital. And I just appreciate you reaching across. But what do you see Heartbeat reaching out to, to get more people in the African American community aboard to this? Because we have been so far behind, and it's like, wait a minute, we gotta step up to the plate and be a part of this because this is awesome. Awesome, awesome, awesome. And I want to thank you guys for the leadership and everything you do here at Heartbeat. I appreciate it so much.
Thank you, Pat. You know, you've inspired us as a board member. We've had several of these conversations in the past, and there's a couple of key things that we've been working on doing. And I was having this discussion with actually one of our visitors was with us and was kind of questioning things and asking about asking me this question in a different way. And one of the commitments that Heartbeat has made is really the idea that we're going to believe and assume that there are people from the minority communities in America that are leaders in their own right. And that they have something powerful to tell all of us. Because it's not for the lack of serving minorities in the centers. Because if you look at how we serve a lot of minorities in almost proportionate to the number of abortions that are happening, which is an atrocity against the minorities on the abortion side, right? So from a client perspective, we serve all types in all ways. The challenge has been to kind of integrate the power of really the Black church, in essence, to really stand up leaders, and there are tremendous leaders, and we've heard tremendous voices stepping out. You know, it's just powerful to see more and more who are doing that. And so even as the pregnancy help centers are raising up leaders, we want to highlight them. We did that today with the Latina community, and we continue to do it. And sometimes I feel like we've made missteps in the past we think to look at someone who's a certain skin color or has a certain heritage, and we say to them, "Will you come and talk to us about reaching people like you?" And that's a valid moment. That's a valid thing to do, but that's not enough. Right. We need to realize that they have skills, that they have an anointing, and that they have a clarity about leadership that applies to all of us. And so we've basically been trying to find ways to kind of, I think the term in the schools is mainstream. We want to mainstream leaders that are from that community because they are good leaders in their own right and stand them up that way. And until we do that, and I would say, Pat, you ask a great question. that is particularly directed at the U.S. audience, but we have some powerful African women who are leading. We have some tremendous Asian women who are stepping forward. We have in Latin America, we have a number of women and men who are stepping forward and leading in their own right. And so, if nothing else, we're going to borrow from them and bring them into the U.S. experience, because it's really an idea that we do this. We are better together in all these ways, and we need to do more of that.
Mm-hmm. Time for one more question, and that's all. Anybody else?
I am asking this question on behalf of a board member. As some of us in this room know, you start to get a little bit older, and you can look at your own personal timeline and see ways God has worked. So the question that I have for the board member who had to step out was, what did you want to be when you grew up, and how would you see that kind of transforming into where you are today?
Want me to answer first? Well, I got to be what I always wanted to be, because when I was a kid, I was always really inspired by the missionaries. I was raised in Catholic schools, and missionaries were just so inspirational. We brought them in, we raised money for them. We saved the rice bowls, for that looked like a rice bowl, but you put your money in during Lent to make sacrifices, and then that was given to the missions. So I always kind of wanted to be a missionary. But the other thing I always wanted to be was a teacher. And I did get to be a teacher. I got to be an English teacher for 20 years, which I absolutely loved. I loved every minute of it. And so when God was calling me, I thought, to work full-time in pro-life, first of all, I couldn't believe it, because here I was doing what I always thought I wanted to do. But now, through my work at Heartbeat, I've gotten to be kind of a missionary and travel to other countries. And I've also gotten to continue to teach. I got to write the love approach and teach it. So I feel like God gave me what I always wanted.
And as a friend of ours describes, this is the mission field created by abortion.
Right.
It's an unreached people group, as he would say. Yeah.
Yeah. What about you?
Oh, my turn. Oh. Yeah, I had this idea that I was going to be a marine biologist, and then I saw the movie Jaws, and that's not going to happen. No, I don't know how I got here, really, honestly. This is, like you think of, I'm sitting in a conference, by the way, for those who have not been attending the conference. It's only 90% women. And there have been plenty of moments over the years that I've said, Lord, how did I get here? But it's just one of those things where this captivated my heart early. Mm-hmm. I was kind of on a business path. I was kind of doing the business thing and not really quite sure what I truly wanted to do, and then suddenly God revealed to me what I truly wanted to do. I just didn't know it at that time. And then as I continued to walk this walk, there were a couple of key instances for me where I could have made a different decision and would have been on another path. But I look back now and say, I see how God preserved me for this very thing, for this very moment, for the opportunity to raise up in leadership in a local pregnancy center, and then to have the privilege and blessing to meet Peggy Hartshorn, and now serve with her for so many years, and have the tremendous privilege to step into her role as she vacated it, to really step into a new season of her life, and allow me the privilege to serve as president of Heartbeat International.
It's been a blessing. It's been a blessing for me, Jor-El. Yeah. But I want to add a couple things, though. First of all, the marine analogy there. God called fishermen to be fishers of men. And I think you had the marine thing was somehow kind of a premonition of that. And then the business thing. Jor-El really is a very smart businessman. And that is a gifting of yours. And I think your tremendous administrative skills and business head, strategic thinking has been a real gift to Heartbeat and our movement. So in a way, God kind of fulfilled everything you wanted to be too.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's one way to look at it, yeah. God's been at work. Yeah. Are we good?
Well, I think that was a good question to end on there. So I know there's more to tell of this story, and we have a book coming out very soon here. So this is sort of a teaser for that, because there's even more to come in that book. So keep an eye out for that. Thank you to our live audience for listening. This was fun. We might have to do this again and bring you all back in. Thank you to our listeners who are listening to the recording of this later. Again, we're at the Heartbeat Annual Conference celebrating 50 years of Heartbeat International. So it's been a good week, and we are just wrapping up today. This is our last day. So if you enjoyed this podcast, you can go to heartbeatinternational.org/podcast to hear some of our other episodes. You can subscribe to podcasts through your favorite podcast player and get more information, or contact Heartbeat at any time if you have questions, comments, or feedback. Thanks for listening.